Welcome home. Thank you very much for coming this evening and for your continued support of the Wyoming State Archives Speaker Series. I'm Robin Everett. I'd like to take a moment to introduce some other people that are here with us this evening. In the back, hiding behind the table, is Sarah Davis, our state archivist. We also have Susie Taylor, one of our reference archivists, doing technical support and online moderation for tonight's program. I have a few housekeeping items I need to take care of beforehand. Please be certain to sign in. If you haven't signed in when you came in, please sign in before you leave. Please take a moment and silence your cell phones. The restrooms are in the lobby back by the elevators. We also have remote viewers online for this program. For everyone online and in person, we'll have questions at the end of the program. For our viewers online, your mics and video are turned off during the presentation, but you'll be able to turn them on during questions. Please use the raise your hand using the icon at the bottom of the screen, and Susie will call on you. Or if you prefer not to appear in the recording, you may ask your question in the chat and it will be read by Susie. This evening's program is part of our partnership with State Parks and Historic Sites. We're fortunate to have Jenna Thorburn and Tione Wilcox to a presentation on Camp Douglas Officers Club Historic Site. I don't know about you guys, I'm kind of excited about this one, which was a prisoner camp during World War II. Jenna very graciously brought some items from the camp with her. Please stop by and check them out, but please do not touch. Jenna is the superintendent and curator of several historic sites in Wyoming. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Wyoming in social science with the emphasis in U.S. history and a master's in museum studies from the University of Oklahoma. She's a fifth-generation Wyomingite. Don't mess with her. Tione started as a volunteer in 2016 and transitioned into a part-time seasonal employee with Wyoming Pioneer Memorial Museum about 5 years ago. Wyoming native, she grew up in Lander and moved to Douglas in 1992. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenna. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming with me. So tonight I'm going to go over some of the facts about Camp Douglas from when it was constructed through renovation, how state parks, how it became a site for state parks and historic sites. Then I'll talk a little bit about the murals and the art, and we do have 2 carvings out here too. We just have so many art pieces in our collection, it was hard to figure out which ones to bring, but this is a 2-sided painting. We'll flip it when Tione starts to talk. She'll talk about 4 or 5 of some of the characters that we've come to know and love in who had something to do with Camp Douglas. But yeah, we have these two paintings like this. This one happens to be from Enzo Tarquinio, one of the Italian prisoners, and the murals on the walls, which I'll be talking about at the Officers Club. He was one of the main artists for that. And then we have another painting, and it's a 2-sided bison, but we couldn't fit it in the truck, or we would have brought it. And then this other piece I'll talk about later. It's the newest piece we acquired this fall, and it has a pretty interesting history. But we will go through some facts about the camp. First, doesn't matter which way I swipe.
Sorry, there you go. Swipe like your other way. Right. There you go. Okay. It does just like
Yeah, there'll be a lot of pictures throughout this of what the site looked like. And I'll go through those. But the U.S. government purchased the land for the POW camp for Douglas for $23,955, and it cost $1.1 million to build the camp. It was 687 acres, 180 buildings, temporary buildings that weren't meant to last more than 5 years when they were built. The camp was built in less than 5 months. It started in January of 1943, completed in May, all of those 180 structures. And there was 2 weeks in March that we've read about where they complete construction altogether due to snowfall, as we all know that can happen here in Wyoming. 500 personnel, that included U.S. Army personnel and civilians that worked at Camp Douglas, and Camp Douglas even had a canine corps that worked around the clock. These are some pictures of when it was being built and how the barracks and everything started to come together. Okay. Camp Douglas was fully sufficient town on its own, and it didn't rely on Douglas at all. It had barracks, 150-bed hospital, which was a bigger hospital than the town of Douglas at the time, and I'll talk about later about that hospital. Mess halls, motor pool, cemetery, fire departments. It had its own newspaper. Guards and carpenters and firemen, nurses, they all were hired at this facility. Oops. This way.
It's new technology.
I'm a historian. Fire department. This is what it looked like from a higher view, but pretty large for Douglas. And if you go there now, yeah, of course, the interstates. Okay. Oh, technology. The first prisoners started to arrive in August of 43. 412 Italians were the first to come. And from 43 to 45, 2,000 Italians, 3,000 Germans were at Camp Douglas. Of course, not all at once. The Italians came first. Then when they left, the Germans were last to be housed there. Prisoners ranged from 14 to 80. The 14-year-old died of battle wounds. And then the 80-year-old, he was a Red Cross worker out of Germany that had been captured when the Germans were captured and brought to Wyoming. And then 7 other prisoners died from injuries or disease that they already had prior to coming to America. All the prisoners who died at Camp Douglas, did I skip way far?
There.
So they were disinterred, and then they were reburied in Fort Riley, Kansas. And then if the families chose to bring them back to the homeland, they were repatriated. But otherwise, they may still be at Fort Riley, Kansas. 6 prisoners attempted escape from Camp Douglas. 2 were caught near the Platte River in Douglas, and each had 6 pair of issued long underwear, and they were huddled in a haystack. And then there was a few that escaped. We have a great video when you go to Camp Douglas, and they show these dummies that they found in their beds in the barracks that these prisoners had made to throw them off. We'd love to get a copy of that, but it's up somewhere, but we can't find that picture. But these guys were captured near Glendale, and when they were captured, they asked what state they had gotten to. So not as big as Europe, or not as small as Germany.
Just one finger.
One finger.
There you go.
Okay. So one of the most interesting things about the camp is well-behaved prisoners were allowed to go off-site to satellite camps, is what they call them, and work. Some, you could see they made $4 a day, $2 in script to be used at the post exchange, or $2 in cash, which was deposited into a bank account. Some of them left with as much as $500 in their pocket as prisoners to go back home with. So these satellite camps, they worked on ranches, farms, mainly and in the mountains for kayak and timber projects. You probably heard of a few of the satellite camps around, but there was 17 total. And also individual farmers and ranchers could apply through a government co-op to have prisoners work for them. So it wasn't like a big group of them. Some would take, 2 to 3, depending on how many they thought they needed. But they were the reason some of our farms, ranches, and industries survived during the war. Okay, one finger.
Oh, come on.
Can I just do
And
this?
there we go.
Our smart board does not have that. Our
Ours is
smart
on
board
his
has this.
This is just a picture of some prisoners that were at the Cross Ranch in near Douglas. And this family still in Douglas. I think there's 1 or 2 of them in Cheyenne actually. But they actually sponsored one of the Germans to come back, and he lived the rest of his life here in Cheyenne. Which I just found out this summer about that. So this is a list of all the satellite camps in Wyoming that we know of. Camp Douglas was the main hub. Fort Warren, of course, that's where they all came through by train first. That was their first stop when they came through Wyoming. Douglas is where they harvested them all out to these camps throughout Wyoming. And we were doing a program in Torrington about this, and a guy from Veteran told us he had prisoners working on his farm that he remembered as a little kid coming to work for his father. And we later found out that some of the eastern half of the state, they had prisoners from the Sydney prisoner of war camp come to that part of the state to work some of those crops. But that's a lot of towns that were affected by the prisoners helping out. And of course, I talked about our talented prisoners. Okay. Lots of artwork, we have tons of woodworking, wood crafts, gorgeous bowls. Well, you'll see out here, there's a tank made of wood. A lot of this stuff, they would use dried up cottage cheese and water as glue. So how it survived all this time, I have no idea, but we're proud to have it in our collection. And a lot of this stuff was acquired by, they would become friends with these ranchers and farmers and community members, and then they would make this stuff to thank them for letting them work on their farms. And so then these people started donating this stuff to us. And then some of it was saved when the camp was being torn down. This piece was saved from that part. But I talked to you about Enzo. He was, and Tione's going to go in more depth about Enzo because we recently found out a lot more about him. And we had no idea about any of them except for their first name, or for their first initial and their last name. Enzo Tarquinio. And you can look up closer to this one, but it has his signature there. And on all the murals that he did, he would put 43 on there also. And the murals on pretty much every wall of the Officers Club, which is the only building still standing from this era. And we like to say, so the murals, I'm not going to show you all of them because you have to come up there and see them. So this is one of the woodworking bowls we have. This is Enzo. You can sometimes tell the Italian artists from the German artists. This one we're not sure of, but it's a plaster. And then we have a Virgin Mary plaster piece too. We also have Enzo did a Jesus picture, but we have just files full of these kind of pieces of artwork. Some are in crayon, some are pencil drawings, some are color pencil drawings, but it's pretty neat to see all of them. And then the wood carvings are insane that they used. Here, sorry. This is a a photo album, front cover of a photo album. And so it's all embossed and stuff. And that's just another wood carving example. And we do have artists that have done German pieces, and they're more like windmills, stuff like that. So our murals, we like to say that our three artists were inspired by other American artists such as C.M. Russell, Thomas Moran, and William Henry Jackson. So this is an example of a book I found when I was when we were starting to do the interpretation at Camp Douglas. Someone in the Douglas Historic Preservation handed me this C.M. Russell book. And I started comparing them to the murals. And they have this book at the camp, I am convinced. So this is the C.M. Russell in his book. And this is one of our murals. And the same here, this is one of his letters and sketches. And then you can see the drawings. But in the bar at the Officers Club, I have this depicted under each mural. So you can see the difference, the inspiration they got from C.M. Russell, William Henry Jackson. This is one of my favorites. This is also in the bar. It does expand over the window, but we don't have the eagle, is all. And this is our mural, and this is a William Henry Jackson. So you can see, pretty inspired. Yeah. And I'm not going to show you any more murals because you have to come see them. So the Camp Douglas prisoner war camp officially closed February 1946. And the War Assets Administration began disposing of the buildings and everything. First, they were given to federal, local agencies who wanted them, and then they were sold for surplus and scraps to private entities. I do have an interpretation at the camp that shows different buildings around town in Douglas that you can tell were once a barracks or part of a building. So someone had asked me beforehand, is that lumber yard still using one of the barracks as to keep their lumber dry? Well, they moved, so no. But I do have pictures of a gal who her book's coming out this December about Camp Douglas. She went around and took pictures of all the buildings for us, and you can tell by the windows or just the material that they are barracks around Douglas. There's not very many left, but there's a few. So all the buildings except for the firehouse, the officers club, and the hospital were torn down. The hospital became the county hospital until 1951. I had to fact check that 100% because I had I thought it was until much later than that, but we couldn't get anyone at the hospital to confirm for me or at the county before I came here. But 51 is what I found in a different piece that I read recently. So the Officers Club was initially purchased by the Douglas Community Club, which still exists. It's, if you've been to Douglas and golf, you probably know that's what the golf club is called, Community Club. And then they sold it to the Lodge 15 of the International Order of Oddfellows. If you go to Camp Douglas, you will see a lot of Oddfellows signage and stuff still there. And our kitchen is pink. It's an homage to the Rebeccas of the Oddfellows. So we can't decide if we ran out of money during restoration or if we just decided to leave it pink just to have something to talk about. It is a talking point. Everyone's like, the Army had pink kitchens? No. So anyway, then so since 1980, Camp Douglas is the only building that was still standing as part of the former camp. And then State Parks took the site over, well, in 2012, but it has a long history of how we got there, almost a 20-year history, or 12-year history of how people were fighting to get it into the state historic sites realm. Here's a picture of the hospital before it was torn down. So from 2000 to 2010, a few people in Douglas began fighting hard to get this thing in the state historic sites. The Oddfellows were dwindling down to about a handful of members, and they were worried about the murals. And so they wanted to make sure it wasn't just going to be torn down or painted over. They wanted it protected. So that's another reason we keep homage to the Oddfellows, because if it wasn't for them, this building would probably be gone. And they had the building from, I think it was 1960 or so, maybe earlier than that. And then to 2010, when they finally, there was a few members in Douglas who at the historic preservation, Douglas Historic Preservation, who started campaigning and fundraising and hounding the legislators literally until they were tired of her and Sherry Molinax, and she and several other people in the community. Jim Anderson happened to be the president of the Senate at the time and from Douglas, and she raised so much money. First, she raised money to put a new roof on it because she was afraid that roof was going to fall and ruin the murals. She also had them the murals cleaned by a painting conservationist, which that's not cheap. State Parks paid for that at one point, a second or third time so far. And then so this is when it was the Officers Club during World War II. This is when it was Oddfellows. Well, this is State Parks, because you'll see the windows later. We did those pretty windows. So then I should have left it up earlier. The sign is one of my favorites, the Oddfellow sign. When you want to drive in, it's still there. So finally in 2012, Molinax had raised 300,000 plus. I've seen some people say 500,000 in Douglas, but I don't know if that's how much exactly they had raised, and then went to the legislator, and then of course the legislator's like, "Oh, you have money? Okay, sure. We will make this a historic site." There's a lot more than that, but years and years and years of Sherry and Jim, and there's a guy named Frank Peasley also that I didn't put on here. He fought hard for fundraising and everything, but that's a lot of money for a little town to raise. And it's relatively, well, it's a short time. So then we'll stop the restoration. It was mothballed until about 2015 after we got it in 2012. They would, Sherry and former Superintendent Arlene Ernst would give tours when people wanted it. Basically, it was just the blank, empty building with murals, which is the best part of it. But so then we started the restoration part with State Parks. We started windows. We got windows from the Veterans Museum in Casper. That building is an identical building to ours because it was the Officers Club for the American officers when Casper was an air base. So Sherry Molinax found out that they had these original windows stored somewhere in Casper, and she talked them into letting us have those windows. And they are now in the original windows to our same building, basically. So 18 windows on the sun porch. I've been painting those, and there's 36 total, and I haven't got done before snow starts. So if you haven't been to Douglas, it's pretty windy. And
Wyoming.
yeah, well, you're in Cheyenne, I know. But where this is, it's like a wind tunnel, and everything just like weather is right there. I'll show you our new sign. It also didn't last very long. But from 2017, we opened to the public for limited hours. We also put new steps, and we redid the entire sun porch. The Odd Fellows who had put in a drop ceiling, we took out the drop ceilings. We reconstructed the bar. The Odd Fellows had pool table, original pool table from the officers. They put that in the bar, took out the bar. So we put everything back to where it is. So original pool table, 1943 pool table is in, we still have it. It's now where it used to be in the billiard room. We recreated the bar, took out the drop ceilings, had another conservationist come, the same one, and cleaned the murals after all this. And he said, for as old as they are in excellent condition. The only problem is the shifting of the building, because it was only meant to last 5 years. 5 years. And when you hear truckers go by, you feel the whole building shifting. So some of it has shifted, some nails and stuff, but a little flaking. And of course, the drop ceilings, when we took those out to reveal the original beams, there's discoloration because the murals went all the way up. So you can see basically the original color versus our color now. Let's see. Put in all new doors, repaired a bunch of stuff. Then we got our beautiful sign. And then we decided we would put 3 new flagpoles up to represent each country: Germany, Italy, and of course America. And then I had to get a new flagpole because it bent in the wind. Yeah. In 2020, one of our amazing volunteers paid to have all new curtains put in. It was, I swear, the original curtains, they just disintegrated when we took them off the hangers. So we got new curtains. That was no small feat, saying we have 36 windows. And our district is made up of the Platte River District, and we're the only historic sites in the district. So Ennis, Kimball, Wilkins, Glendale State Park, and Guernsey State Park. Those fine people helped us move a whole bunch of cases into Camp Douglas during COVID because we were closed for 2 extra months. And Tione and I put in all new displays. So if you haven't been there in a while or are coming to see us, it is now more of a museum-like feeling inside there. So this is what it looked like when it's the Officers Club. This picture is with the drop ceilings, and this is now when we State Parks took out the drop ceilings. And they're all original fixtures. The Odd Fellows never took those out. So, or they did, but they stored them. They had them in storage. Thank goodness. This is our sunroom. The Odd Fellows had basically blacked out the whole sunroom and never, I guess, used this for storage as well. So this is without how it appeared originally. Not the furniture, but furniture is Odd Fellows. So the pool room was in the bar. This was the original bar. Now it's in the billiards room. We did have the floors finished in the billiards room only. Original bar. Now you're going to cheat. You're going to see some murals that I didn't want to show you. And then here's our reconstructed bar. We couldn't find the cooler though. That was hard to find. So if anyone has a really old 1940s cooler, it doesn't say anything on it, like nothing like Coors or Coke. We want it. And then this is what Tione and I put in all the displays. And the shuffleboard, that was not officers era. That was put in by the Odd Fellows. Odd Fellows like shuffleboard. Okay. Oh, there was So this is what the old windows look like. And then, I think new pictures. There's the new, and there's our beautiful sign that the wind ripped down right as soon as, like a week after we got it. And there's our old sign. That one lasted like a day. It's paper. I wasn't the one who put that up. We were trying to get attention. And then our 3 flagpoles. Yeah, I had to go up to 110-mile-an-hour flagpole. And then this summer we got recognized with a restoration award from the Wyoming Pioneer Association for all of our work we've done over there in restoring the city. And now I am going to hand it over to Tione. She's going to talk about some of the characters that we know most about and that people have donated the most information. But before we do that, I was going to talk about this drawing that I was out painting the windows the other day, September. Some guy comes up to me, I've got something you need. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Because, you know, we get a lot of stuff. The people are cleaning out their garage. And I was like, well, we have to go back up to the Pioneer Museum because if I want it, all the paperwork's there. And he didn't show this to me while he was at Camp Douglas. So then he unveils it and tells me the story. His wife, who had passed away, her grandfather cut this out of a barracks building wall before it was torn down. So this is on the interior of a barracks building wall. We found, so they lived in Denver, or they knew some German lady in Denver, and she ended up writing home and putting it in a newspaper. Does anybody know of this? And put a picture. And this guy wrote back and said, my uncle was obsessed with Vivian Lee. And he told us he was in a camp at the foot of the mountains in Wyoming. And that has to be his. Because Vivian Lee was his ideal woman.
That was his partner while he was laying in bed by
we think he just sketched in his bottom bunk while he was lying in bed. So that is how our newest piece, among many, many, but Jen's going to talk about some of the more interesting characters.
Thanks, man. That's cool. So a couple of things before we go on to these gentlemen. So Jenna was talking about how we have found out more information in the past few years. We had a lady by the name of Laura Roberto who was doing she'd gotten a grant through Wyoming Historic Preservation, and she came in during COVID and was doing research on the artists and some of the other items that we have. Well, she had found Mr. Tarquinio's family back in Italy. And Mr. Tarquinio helped dispel a few things that we thought would be fact with the camp. The first one was we were led to believe all these years that all of our prisoners were captured in the African theater. Well, upon doing research on Mr. Tarquinio, he was actually in Russia and was injured when he was fighting with the Nazis. They sent him back to Italy to convalesce, and he was put out on patrol as soon as he was well enough. At that point, the Allies had already invaded, and so he was out for a couple of days, and he was captured. And upon finding him, they asked him if he was going to surrender, and he very happily agreed to surrender. From there, he was sent down to Morocco. And so that's when he became part of the African theater. There were quite a few captured there, but he was kind of the proof that not all of them were. So the neat thing, when he did his time here with us, he went back home eventually, and he had a little brother, Sergio, who was quite a bit younger, and he regaled Sergio with all these stories about Wyoming and the cowboys and the Indians and the Old West. And if you look up his brother Sergio Tarquinio, He too was very talented, but he was a cartoonist. And he made a lot of comic books that were about the cowboys and Indians of Wyoming. I love to share that story because it just shows how things come full circle. Jenna had also brought up the fact that these guys went home with money. You know, I tell people, I like to think that we helped to rebuild the world after the war. So this gentleman here, we'll start with him. Captain Neffel, Clement Neffel, he was the quartermaster of Camp Douglas for pretty much the whole time that it was open. He was also kind of the commanding officer in between replacements. We like to call him the Radar O'Reilly of Camp Douglas. He kept track of everything. And by some weird coincidence, after the war, he was able to keep a lot of his paperwork, which we still don't quite understand because so much of that was hush-hush. We have boxes of documentation, everything from the rations, you know, when they were preparing the meals, they had to weigh the food. After the meals were eaten, besides separating the fats and that, they had to weigh that, and then they would change the rations weekly to go with that. And that was his job. One of the things I love to tell people, he came up with a cookbook. Well, it wasn't a cookbook. It was in one of the books. It had a lot of the recipes they used, like egg sauce and Normandy carrots and tomato aspic. If anybody's had that, it's tomato jello. It's disgusting. But that was a big delicacy. Among his recipes, there were also large bulk recipes for cookies. I was president of our auxiliary for 5 years, and every October we bake cookies for the American Legion Auxiliary to bring to the veterans here in Cheyenne. And so we use 2 of those recipes to make bulk batches. So we'd love to brag about that. Yeah, I'm not even going to attempt it. I will. So then we have Bernice Olam. On the slide that showed the beautiful wood bowl, that was given to Bernice. We call Bernice the hottie of Camp Douglas. Obviously, you can tell she was a very beautiful woman. We have, instead of having all of the art on display because the murals are on the walls, we've made flip books. Mr. Neffel's, a lot of his information is in a flip book. We have a book on Bernice, and you can see some of the drawings and color sketches they did. Well, besides that, there are also marriage proposals. There were Italians, and we had some exchange students that thought it was hilarious because one of them said, "If you do not marry me, I will be in the crazy hospital." So we just loved the stuff that Bernice her family had given us. Well, eventually, in a lot of the pictures, we saw Bernice with an American soldier. Well, they dated for quite a while. They did Christmas cards together and such. Ultimately, Bernice never left Douglas. In speaking with some of the people from Douglas, they go, "Oh yeah, that was Bernice Burns." So she ended up marrying a rancher outside of Douglas and spent the rest of her life there. She did not have children, so her nieces had actually kept all of these items, and when Bernice passed, they gave them to us. So we have a lot of wonderful things for her. So the Armetas is a really interesting story. Excuse me, my mouth dries out very quickly. It's from all my gabbing. So Anthony Armeta was a guard there at Camp Douglas, and he went bowling one evening, and he met a very pretty young lady, and her name was Bernice. So she's our other Bernice at Camp Douglas. Bernice's family had a ranch outside of town, and the Thurston family is still in Wyoming. Well, they fell in love, and they got engaged, and they got married in Lovell. Why Lovell, you ask? Anthony called Bernice, and he said, "I've got to take some prisoners up there for the harvest, and let's get married there." And a couple of years ago during COVID, we got to Skype with Bernice. She was 102. And her comment was, "Never let a man plan your wedding. So they were married throughout their lives. Basically, the rest of Anthony's life, they had a daughter who passed away, and then they have a son, Michael. And Michael comes and sees us every couple of years and always brings us goodies.
And from Baltimore.
Yes, they are from Maryland. We have a display that the Armetas with this is their wedding picture. And then we have a lot of other items. And Michael has brought us some great things because he really felt that this was where their story started and these things need to come back. You'll see the items out here. Those were Mr. Armeta's that were made by the prisoners and given. And Enzo, so one of the other things that's interesting with Enzo is you see the bus and such, there is a kind of a park, and Mr. Tarquinio is very famous there. They actually have a bust of him. His job before he got into the war was refreshing frescoes in the old churches. And so he was very artistic. When he went back and kind of got back into his life, as he got older, he basically died doing what he loved. He was painting and had a massive heart attack, and about 20 minutes after that passed away. So he died doing what he enjoyed doing, which was his art. The other thing we found through Miss Roberto, she was visiting with some people in Italy, and there are two very cool paintings, sketches that another Italian prisoner paid Mr. Tarquinio to do of his wife and of his son.
Wow.
So yeah, we're finding all of this great information out. It's just taken us, 80 years to get there. So this gentleman, and I'm sure there are some of the Cheyenne locals that know the Orianos. Caesar Oriano was an interesting fellow. He was from Palermo in Sicily, and he was actually caught 5 or 6 times before it stuck. He had been caught by the English and a lot of the Allies. Well, about the last time they brought him up here. He was quite the character, as you can tell from some of the pictures. Very handsome man. So he was here, and his brother was also a prisoner with him. The Italians, upon Italy's surrender, we sent all of our POWs here to Fort Warren for processing. At that point, obviously, we were still at war, so they had a choice. You could either belong to a service unit that was helping the Americans, and that was by the new ruler of Italy. It was kind of his idea. So you could either be part of that or you remained a prisoner. Most of the fellows that remained prisoners were sent down to Texas. There were a couple of prisoner of war camps there that they were stuck in. Mr. Oriano chose to be part of the service unit. He was a cook. Well, as they were processing them, there was another family, and I am not even going to try to say Jenny's last name, but they were from that same village. And as they were visiting with the prisoners, Jenny and Caesar got to be very friendly. Before Caesar went back to Sicily, he was in Romulus, New York. That was one of his last jobs, and she went and saw him there. He went to Italy. Fortunately, Jenny worked at, I believe it was the county clerk's office. She worked in the government here in Cheyenne and found out a way to get Caesar back. And not only did she sponsor, because all of our prisoners had to go home before they could come back. They had to be sponsored. So she sponsored Caesar and 2 other brothers, the Ravino brothers from that same village. Needless to say, when they got back, Jenny and Caesar got married. Caesar's real spelling for his name up until he came back to America was Casere, which was the Italian version of it. We have the documentation that he changed his name to Caesar, which is spelled the American way, and then he became a citizen that same day. So very cool. They operated many businesses throughout their lives here in Cheyenne. The one that I like to tell people about is you see in the bottom, they had the Crown Bar. downtown here in Cheyenne, which obviously is still going today. They had 3 daughters, and I was given the privilege this July of being able to do a walk with them. We started at the Pioneer Museum and walked to Camp Douglas. In visiting with the girls, they had mentioned that their dad was kind of a sketch artist himself, and we're not sure, but we think he may have possibly helped to sketch out some of those murals or some of the rough before it was painted. So it's very cool. And I love their story because he was not an American citizen, became one, and also gave us 3 Wyoming natives. So pretty cool. So that's just kind of a little bit of our characters. We have one of the things Jen and I have worked at doing too is telling the story, not just of our prisoners, obviously, but of our officers, our guards. We have our citizens. Bernice Olam, she was just a citizen who became a nurse's aide who made such a big impact on what we have now. So we encourage you guys to come. We'd love to tell you stories about some of the other characters that we have there. So if anybody has questions, we'll open it up to that.
Who were the horses? Are they any particular horse?
I think they were just horses.
Okay.
And one of the things they said is that they would take, if you could find an apple crate, they would make it into something. One of the artifacts we have is a ring that was made out of a silver coin. So just some amazing things. Anybody else? Yes, in back.
The prisoners of war here in Cheyenne, was that also an extension of Douglas?
No, that was actually at Fort Warren. The prisoners were housed through Fort Warren Army Air Corps base because obviously it was World War II. They hadn't had the airports yet.
So are you open on special requests during
Yes.
from October to May?
So one of the things that, we close right at Labor Day and we open April 1st. We're given a very small window to get a lot of work done.
June 1st.
Excuse me, yeah, I'm the
August
opposite. We
31st.
close in September, open in April. But yes, we can do them. Give us a little heads up. We are doing some great projects and we just were able to be closed at the Pioneer Museum Tuesday, well, basically Sunday through Thursday. We're open Friday and Saturday in the winter, but we love to get people in there. So call us and
Call the Pioneer Museum.
We'll get you set up.
When we're closed for the season.
I'm disappointed. they didn't
Is that
have the
Pioneer
ones.
Museum the one that's at the state fairground?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
This gentleman has a story about the hospital.
I was telling that, I don't remember what year it was, but I got my tonsils out at that hospital.
I'd love to tell, I have a couple people that I know that were born there and they tell people we were born in prison. Hilarious. That's neat. Well, and having that hospital really also helped to build Douglas as a community because it was very state of the art. And with all of our rural ranches and entities, it really built it up. So, and obviously, as you come into Douglas, after they tore Camp Douglas down, it's only natural that with the infrastructure already in place that you would see us expand across the river.
There was that list of all the different places where prisoners were
Mhm.
located around Wyoming. Was one of them down around Battle Mountain in the Sierra Madre?
Right.
'Cause I-
In Grand
Yeah,
Park.
Ryan
Yeah,
Park.
Ryan
Oh,
Park.
Ryan Park.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so one of the things like Jenna talked about, my father-in-law, who just turned 88, when he was young, his dad would come into town and he would get prisoners and a guard and take them out to the ranch. And they dug the cistern that we used till we left the ranch. They did a lot of the handwork. My father-in-law says he can remember as a child, and they were German prisoners that came out to the ranch, and one of them came up behind him and threw him in the air, absolutely terrified him. He was convinced he'd been taken prisoner by a Nazi.
Where's the ranch?
We were 14 miles south of Douglas, out towards Estabrook. But yeah, a lot of the things that we like to tell people too is we have so many family farms, ranches, businesses that would have gone insolvent had it not been for these guys. We don't glorify or do anything as far as the war goes. I can tell you that what these gentlemen were to us was human beings. And I think it was a great learning lesson to the people of Douglas and the people of Wyoming. You know, my soft spots with the Italians because they're amazing. They kind of got pulled into it. But, you know, a lot of these guys went home knowing that we were not the monsters that we were portrayed to be. We treated them like humans, like they unfortunately didn't treat our folks. So, yes.
How were these sites picked?
For the camps themselves, part of it was location. Yeah,
CCC.
yeah. Well, and it's location, location, location. Where can you go where you're not going to be near the borders, near escape
They
areas?
had to have a rail system going through it. They had to be a certain number of miles away from a coast. And that's Wyoming.
There's my
I should have put a map. We do have a little map that shows the United States and where they were all located. I should have put that
There
up.
were a few later on that were around the edges, but most of them were in the Midwest. And there are still a few around the country that have some existing buildings. I have yet to see any that are as beautifully preserved as our building is.
And that statement that you just made, you should ask the audience how many of us have been there and actually seen it.
That is a good question. How many of you have actually been to Camp Douglas?
Actually, we decided over Labor Day weekend
And we were
and you were closed, or Fetterman was closed, so we were planning, okay, we'll come back when you open, and then we saw that this presentation was going on. But no, we
Yes.
came up to see you, and we drove around till we found the building.
So one of the things you'll see on the backside now is we have this cute little U shape and it's 3 planters. We got the state parks received a grant through Still, chainsaws, outdoor equipment, and the state matched it. So it was a $10,000 grant and matching, so 20. They purchased some of these little planters for us. One of the things that Jenna and I have wanted to do since we started working together and working on Camp Douglas is to have a victory garden. Educating people on the fact that, not only was it feeding our soldiers in World War I, but during World War II, when this was open, that was so huge for the communities. So we actually got the start for that. And if you keep coming back and visiting, you're going to see it growing and growing. We have a friends group. And if you look on the back of your pamphlets, if you'd like to donate, I know I'm the president of it, so it's kind of a cheap ploy. If you would like to donate to the Friends of Camp Douglas, we do have a QR code. Ultimately, we want to build that up. We want to start working with some of the youth groups, raising these beds, doing the education process, and then selling the produce at farmers markets. So, does anybody have any other questions?
It looks like we've got a question online. Michaela, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I actually have a couple of different questions and hopefully they don't take very much time.
Well, I'm not hearing you. We might be having some audio problems. Would you be willing to type out your question in the chat? She's typing.
Okay. We have also, one of the things that we added right beyond here is we put some flat pavers down and we have picnic tables there too. So bring lunch.
So she asked, were there any POW organized art exhibitions?
Not that I've heard of. And I know the Veterans Museum also has some murals, but as far as art exhibitions, I have not heard of it.
But the murals at the Veterans Museum were painted by Americans.
Yeah, by Americans, excuse me. So it would be more of World War II.
Okay. She also asked, were the murals in the American, she asked for clarification that the murals were in the American Officers Club,
Yeah.
correct?
So one of the things when this was named, it was not our decision. It should really say Camp Douglas, POW Camp, American Officers Club. Because when you read that, you go, seriously, they made a club for the POWs? What, you know, while our guys were suffering. It was not. This was all for the Americans. There were very few places that wives of some of the officers and the guards and such could come on to base. This was one of them. They had a kitchen, they served meals, they had, you know, a lot of their holiday parties there, that kind of stuff. So yes, the prisoners did not have anything this great.
And did the prisoners get paid for their work on the murals?
I do not believe so. I have not, we can't confirm it because we've never seen anything on it.
Okay.
You know, the Italians were a little easier to work with than I think what the Germans became. We did have one SS unit that was brought here, and they were very maniacal. They were not very nice guys. They were sneaking out from their barracks in the middle of the night, and they would go over and beat the living daylights out of the other German prisoners because they kind of figured they were being too helpful to the Americans, and that's why they were losing the war. There's one, and I hear a lot of stories. I love visiting, being part of the American Legion. I hear some. There was one gentleman that had escaped, and they found him across the river at a house that had, you know, they all had those external attic entries, and he had gone up there through a ladder. They had to send their American credentials up there because he wouldn't come down. And when he did come down, he was beaten so badly and was terrified to go back. So around that time, they took the barracks of the SS unit, they put fenced it off with razor wire, and then they had specific 24-hour guard dogs just for them. They did not last long. They finally were brought here to Cheyenne to the base where there was more ability to contain them.
They were trying to form a coup and trying to overthrow the rest of the camp.
Yeah, they were very, very strange. We had,
They were serious.
yes. And one of the other things, just quickly, we did have other publications, but they were like the Italians had their own newsletter, and the Germans also had a newsletter. They started it, and when the Americans were reading it, they went, absolutely not. It was very political. So they changed it, and it was called the Douglas Open Word. So even though the first set didn't work and was not approved, they did allow them another chance, and they did have these, and we actually do have copies of these, thanks to Captain Neville.
And the state library has the German newspapers, and they have them all scanned on their website if you're interested.
Do you have record of how many died while they were there?
Yeah, it has the 7. And they were from nothing that was done through Camp Douglas.
No
But yeah, that's-
suicides?
No. No, a lot of these guys, and you know, the other part too, I'm more the human side. I can't tell you the battles and such, but you know, coming from the African theater, especially the Germans, they were cut off. Their supply lines have been cut off. They did not have enough food. Their ammunition was starting to run low. These guys were literally surrendering in droves. And so many of them were more than happy to be here. They got beds, they got food, they got treated better than.
They weren't being shot at.
Yeah, exactly. Calisthenics, you had to do certain things, but you were never forced into doing a lot of stuff. So it really, compared to being in the middle of a war, was a very low pressure situation.
And one of the Italians was quoted as saying, "We never had it so good."
So there's a documentary called Prisoners in Paradise, and it's specifically about the Italians. And when they were brought into our American prisoner of war camps, they were afraid to eat because they sat down at tables and here was all of this food. And one of the gentlemen in there says, we really thought that was for somebody else. They had to have the interpreters convince them no, this is your food. And again, I always say it because of Geneva Convention, we took good care of them. Plus, the fact is, if you give these guys food and clothing and beds, and that's where our workforce came from. You know, they're more than happy to work with us. So.
And the Italians often cooked for the officers, and some of them would even were able to cook full Italian spreads in the mess halls.
Yeah, so there is on our video, it does say that Caesar Oriano invited the chaplain of Catholic or of Italian descent to come and have meals, but a disgruntled captain soon made that stop. So I'm reading between the lines, and you know, really, I would think that the disgruntled captain might have been Captain Neffel or one of his cohorts, because yeah, figure one of the biggest jokes in the Army was the mess hall, and here these guys were getting wonderful Italian food. So I'm sure somebody probably would have clicked on for that. Yes, ma'am.
Where is that building physically located in the camp? Was it on the perimeter if wives were coming in and?
It was in the hospital area, right across from the hospital area, because that was one of the other areas that the families, the wives and stuff were
Get
allowed
tonsils
to.
out.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't say it's by a fence or anything. It's still a little ways in, but it is in.
But it wasn't in the middle of all of.
It was not near the barracks or any of that stuff. They were much farther.
Yeah,
to the east.
the nurses' quarters were basically next door. The hospital was across the street, kind of catty corner. If you go there, there's a vet hospital about where it is now.
Between the vet hospital
And then there was
the interstate
officers'
area.
quarters on the other side also. So all the officers and civilians were on one side, and then the barracks were on the other. But they had everything. They had stables, they had a baseball diamond, they had
they used to have tournaments.
a rec hall.
They had a band. I mean,
Yeah,
it was just typical of what you'd read about a lot of the different, you know, Hogan's Heroes type.
So now the rest of it is like communities, like residential buildings and
So
businesses.
basically, well, and so back here to
Can you guys go back
the,
to the aerial photo and
Back
point
to-
out?
In the very beginning, you had that
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
yeah, it's quite a ways.
So there's no other buildings.
She's a
of course,
scrolling.
But
There we
yeah,
go.
So there's,
this is, well, if you go there now, Grasslands Market's across the street, Blowdown Lumber. Then behind us is a church, apartments, and a trailer court. I mean, the property for this one, so the interstates, they're down across the street too, basically, which wasn't there. And then, it went clear to the river, like where all the schools are, almost to the fairgrounds.
and where the overlay, like you're seeing some of these barracks, they were going across. I know one of them, we have a beautiful map. It's kind of the blueprint with a Google Earth overlay. And you can see where the trailer courts are. And it was very convenient where you see those buildings set like that, the way the infrastructure was put in, it was very easy to put, you know, mobile home parks and that such in there.
So it's basically built up all around it now with new
Oh, we're getting
businesses.
more, you know, Wyoming being boom and bust. There were the trailer parks put in and such. We're now getting another building frenzy after the 80s when the last one was. But yeah, it's just natural because it was all already there. The power and everything had been.
There's the hospital and the officers club in those pictures.
Oh, you know,
And
I
kind of
don't
put
think,
this one-
looking at this and just off the hip, I don't think so because those are barracks and, you know, the smaller ones. So unfortunately, we used to have a little more time and
But
ability to
that
do
big
it,
stack,
but we just don't.
this big stack here, I believe is the hospital,
That's what I thought too.
stack. So the officers club
Would
would have been like here, maybe. Oops.
Don't let me know.
Yeah,
It goes a little farther,
yeah, maybe,
but yeah, and
but it's the street that goes in front of the Officers Club now, there was basically a street there. If you come, there's, like the overlay, you can see exactly where it is. And we have the blueprint, of all 180 buildings.
the Google Earth
And
being
then
put
it
over it
has
is
the
awesome.
numbers, cross-reference which building was which. But as far as I know, from other pictures that we have, this is the part of the hospital furnace, I believe. Any more questions?
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
What wonderful opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming this evening. Please be certain to join us on December 14th. Rick Ewing, local historian, is going to talk about the United Airlines crash in 1955 at Medicine Bow. We also have calendars back there with the new updates on the programs for 2024. They hang real nice on your.
So how come you guys didn't talk about the ghost?
This ghost, there's no ghost there.
Thank you.
There's a bingo ghost there.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.